Last week on Not Your Average Globetrotter, we spoke a little bit about why I don't personally see Portugal as the best fit for me personally anymore. I think it's a wonderful country, but in this episode, I wanted to discuss other parts of Europe and kind of go into a further list of different places and giving some of my opinions on them as somebody who's been living abroad for more than a decade and a half, more than 16 years at this point. And I'm not the expert on all of these locations. There are some locations that I definitely know better than others, but I have no problem to admit when I don't know about a particular topic. And this episode was inspired by a comment left on a video recently. I haven't been able to actually find it to be able to quote from it directly, but basically in short, it said, well, if Portugal's not right for you, then why not think about moving to another place? Then challenge yourself, go outside of your comfort zone. Why not think about Eastern Europe or the Middle East or Southeast Asia? And I can say Middle East, been there, done that. Eastern Europe, I've very seriously considered it in the past, and Southeast Asia is maybe a little bit too hot and humid for me. And I can say that personally, I see Europe as home, and I really do enjoy this part of the world, even if some things are maybe not perfect. Let's just jump into the rest of the episode. I'm Rafael Di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. The first country on our list today is Albania. This is a country that I've been hearing more and more about. I personally don't have experience with it, but over the last years, it has become more and more popular with expats and tourists alike. It's still not at the top of many people's lists, but it would be one of those places that could be really interesting to look into if you're looking for a very different lifestyle than maybe what you've had in the US, a little bit of a slower pace, and also lower cost of living. I can say for me personally, I find it very interesting, and I keep seeing news stories and videos coming out of Albania that look quite interesting. And you do happen to come across a number of Albanians living in Italy, and after meeting a number of them, I can say I've become even more curious about the country that they originally come from. The next country on our list is Andorra, another country I have not been to, but it is one of these small nations that's known for being quite beautiful in a small pocket of Europe, a very quiet place, and a lot of people seem to like to go there for tax-free shopping. Although, if I'm not mistaken, they're technically not part of the European Union, so there could be certain things that could pop up if you're trying to go on a shopping trip there and then bring them back into Spain after the fact or go somewhere else. So that's maybe one thing to consider if you're going to be shopping there. But from what I've heard also is that the lifestyle can be a bit on the quiet side, and very much like many small European countries, or even what you can call micronations. The next country on our list is Armenia, another country that I'm very curious about, but don't know well enough. Many years ago, I think it was back in 2009, so many years ago. No, not that many, but there was a Eurovision entry from this country. Inga and Anush, I don't remember exactly the names, but the name of the song was Norpar Can Can. It was just a fun song and had some interesting sounding instruments that I particularly enjoyed. I ended up looking into music from this area a little bit more and found some traditional music from this country was just absolutely beautiful. So I can say this is another area that I'm very curious about, maybe in a similar way that I might be to Albania, but my love for music in general and curiosity about the music style from there might make me even a little bit more curious than Albania. Next on our list is Belarus, another country that I'm curious about, but given the current circumstances in that part of the world, it wouldn't necessarily be at the top of my list for places to travel to at this point in time, or places to think about moving given the current climate. However, the next country on our list, Belgium, is another country that I actually very seriously considered at one point. I am very curious about life in that part of Europe and what it would be like, and I've heard that things like, for example, in a city like Antwerp can be quite boring, and I don't mind a little bit of boring. I do need some excitement and some fun and the ability maybe to go to a coffee shop or a mall or to go for a walk in a very pleasant location. The thing, though, that for me kept me from seriously considering it would be the cost of living there, as well as the cost of health insurance. From what I was able to find out, given my particular set of circumstances, it didn't make the most sense to call Belgium home, but it is a place that I would like to get to know better. And I think for some people, it could offer a quality of life that they could be looking for, especially if they are looking for a little bit of a quieter kind of place. I mean, of course, it's going to depend from what city you're going to be based in, but also for me, again, as a music lover, the home of the saxophone. I mean, this is a country where you also have wonderful chocolate. And as a foodie, between music and chocolate, I think I would be pretty well covered there. And yes, I do make decisions on where to move internationally based on food. And no, I am not joking. Bosnia and Herzegovina, another part of Europe that I can say I have curiosity about, but I wouldn't necessarily say would probably be the best for those who are going to be just moving abroad for the first time, or maybe even going abroad for the first time. There are certain things about that part of Europe that can be really wonderful and can be quite beautiful, although it might not necessarily be the experience that many are looking for when they are coming to Europe for the first time, that they are thinking about certain other locations on the continent. The next country is Bulgaria, another country that I can't say I know too much about, although I did grow up with Bulgarian kids in my school, or one of the schools that I went to. But since I can't say so much about it, we're just going to go straight on to Croatia. And Croatia, this is a country that I actually would be very curious about. I can't say that I would personally see myself living there, but I would like to spend some time there at some point. I have been to Dubrovnik, and Dubrovnik was really such an amazing place. I mean, if you've seen, what's it called, King's Landing in Game of Thrones, basically that is pretty much filmed in Dubrovnik. And in Dalmatia, it is a really beautiful part of the world. And one thing that I found very interesting was the kind of Italian feeling that you had kind of within some of the food and some of the culture and some of the things there in general. I felt like I was in almost a Eastern European version of Italy. I mean, I hope this is not offensive to anybody, but it felt like kind of the crossroads of some of like the kind of Balkan and Eastern European cultures and Italy at the same time. It was really cool. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, even the Venetians had control over this area as well at some point, and you can see the influence on some of these areas. It's really cool, and I would love to get to know the country better, including going to Split and Zagreb. I can definitely say it would be high on my list. Whether I would want to move there or not, that's another question. The next country is Cyprus, a part of Europe that is supposed to be very beautiful. I've had friends who've lived there and said amazing things about it. And it's a country that has some complications. There is one side of the island that is Turkish, and there's another side of the island that is Greek. There are tensions between these two groups of people and between the two sides of the island. It is a place that is quite unique, even historically, and how people see the claims to this island. I'm not going to go into that in this episode, but from what I have heard from people who've lived there is that it can be an amazing place. They were living on the Greek side, but I can't say I know too much about the Turkish side. However, I do know that I absolutely love Turkish food, Turkish culture, Turkish music, and that would be a big draw for me to have curiosity to visit that part of the island at some point in my life. The next on our list is the Czech Republic, otherwise known as, I think they prefer now, Czechia. And it's a country where most people just kind of really know it as Prague and maybe Karlovy Vary and a few like small points where there are, I think Karlovy Vary, I think in English is Carlsbad, the original Carlsbad, not like in, California. But being somebody who's curious about this part of Europe, I can say that I would be interested to go there. However, for me, this is just a personal thing. And it's a really weird thing. It absolutely makes no logical sense. But when I'm traveling or if I'm living in a place, actually, especially if I'm living in a place, and again, I know this is actually really silly, I prefer to be in places with currencies that are easier for me to do the math in. In my mind, just the way that it works, certain things should have certain amounts associated with them. Okay, granted, in this world that we're living in and the cost of everything going up, yeah, these are changing, but a loaf of bread I know should cost like a few euros, a single digit amount of euros, where in a country like the Czech Republic, where the currency that they use at this point in time, 25 Czech crowns is, or maybe roughly 25 Czech crowns is €1. So to see numbers that are going to be much larger for things, it's an illogical thing that kind of plays with my mind. And I've lived in places where it's maybe 5-1, but going 25-1, that's it's just a comfort thing. It's, again, super silly, but if I'm thinking that something should be maybe a few euros or a few dollars, but I'm seeing 75, 100, 200, then for me, it would just be a difficult thing to get to used to living with on a day-to-day basis. Like I've said, I've lived in places where you have like kind of these multiples, and especially when you're buying goods like electronics and you're seeing these inflated prices where you know it should cost maybe like 500, but then you're talking about thousands and thousands of whatever the local currency is, that then gets to be a little bit more, I don't know, intimidating is not quite the right word, but it's less friendly feeling. Again, I know this makes no sense and is quite silly and illogical, but it's just how I see it. The next country on our list is Denmark, a small European country that you can cross in a very short amount of time with a very high quality of life. There are going to be many people who are looking for a life in Europe that could potentially line up with what they might be able to find there. Keep in mind, though, that the cost of living might be considerably higher than what they might find in other parts of the continent. Next on our list is Estonia, a country that is also quite small, but I would say has some very interesting things to consider if you are wanting to do business in Europe and if you're from outside of Europe. You have e-residency available there, and it is something that can allow you to open up a business, but not necessarily have to call Europe home, or something that can actually not even give you the guarantee of being able to call Europe home. Things can get quite chilly and cold in winter, but the next, Finland, a country that again has made me curious because of the music scene, the country that is supposed to have the highest number of metal bands per capita of any country in the world, a country where there are even metal bands for children. Not sure what I think about that, but I think it says something about the country. The language can be quite difficult, and the people that I've met from there have been quite friendly, even though it is quite a cold country. Is it a place that I would consider potentially calling home? Actually, yes. I've actually been curious about Finland for many, many years. Would I consider living there? Yes. Would I actually live there? Probably not. But it is, again, one of these places that I think for some could be worth thinking about if, and only if, they are willing to live in a place that can become absolutely frigid. The next country on our list is France. And this is a quick one. Ew. No. No, thank you. No way, no how. You couldn't even pay me to think about living there. I know there are many people who love it, but it's just not the place for me. Good food, very good food. Raclette. This is, oh my gosh. If you've never had raclette in your life, try it. It'll change your life. And I'm not even someone who really enjoys cheese. But no, thank you. France, hard pass. Let's move on to Georgia. And that is another country that, again, considering kind of certain circumstances within the world right now, that maybe it wouldn't necessarily be at the top of my list. But I've heard things about Georgian wine, and I've heard from people who've lived there that they've really enjoyed it and that they have a very positive opinion about what life was like there during their time. As for my personal interest in the country, I can say I would be more interested in traveling there. There are people, though, who do look at Georgia as a place for potentially doing business, for hiring people, for the cost of talent there and the quality of the talent and people that you can find. It's supposed to be top notch. So this is something also, depending on the type of business that you're doing, could be also interesting to look at, but not necessarily in the EU. So that could be another factor if you are thinking about life in the EU and making a base in this part of the world. The next country on our list is Germany. If you had asked me maybe about anywhere up until maybe 7 years ago, I would have said absolutely Germany would be probably at the top of my list of places to consider. And unfortunately now, I can't say that anymore. Things have changed. And what many people think about Germany and the efficiency and how things are always on time and trains can always be reliable and certain kind of little things about that don't seem to be holding true anymore. The country, even now has been talking about leaving the European Union, and there's a bit of a political mess in the country, at least as of the time of the recording. It seems as though there are going to be snap elections happening in the country, and who knows what direction things could be going there. From what I've been hearing, things have changed a lot in the last, say, maybe 9-10 years there. But even though it would have been maybe at the top of my list at one point in the past, I can't even say it's on that top list anymore. Although, don't get me wrong, for sure a place I want to go spend some time and travel to and explore more. But for those who are thinking about living in Europe, I would say maybe to knock it down a place on the list and maybe to look elsewhere. For example, places like the Netherlands or Belgium. Maybe you're going to find some of what you were looking for in Germany in these places. It's not the same, of course. Or maybe even in Switzerland. I mean, especially in a place like Switzerland, you're going to be seeing the efficiencies of what Germany may have had at one point, but maybe doesn't have at this point in particular right now. But again, I do love German Christmas markets and the foods that you can find and just German foods in general. I'm a fan. I know it's not top for a lot of people, but I personally enjoy it. Spätzle is very highly underrated. German style pasta, tons of cheese. Again, I'm not a big fan of cheese, but that stuff is good. The next country is Greece. And this is another country that has become much more popular, especially in recent years, especially with what they've been doing for people who are looking to make a life there from abroad. Like when Portugal was starting to close up the NHR scheme, Greece and Spain were countries that were kind of opening up their arms to people saying, well, hello there, welcome, come and check us out. And there are going to be a lot of people who might find that Greece could be a really interesting place, especially the weather there could be more to their liking. I mean, Greek food, let's talk about Greek food. Again, yes, when talking about places to live, food is one of those things that ends up at the top of my list. And in general, though, Greeks I found can be quite warm and quite nice and pleasant to interact with. And if you are looking for the Mediterranean lifestyle, this is one of those countries that really you can think about quite seriously, in my opinion. There have been problems in the country regarding kind of the financial side of things, and even when it comes to unemployment, there are challenges within the country. So it's another one of these countries where I would say don't move there if you are looking for work, but if you are coming there with work and you're working remotely, it could be a very interesting option to consider. The next country on our list is Hungary. And even though I've been talking quite a bit about food in this episode, no, I'm not talking about Hungary as in Hunger. I'm talking about Hungary as in Budapest, this country over there in that part of Europe. There are going to be some people who would find living in Hungary quite interesting. However, for many people who are considering the political aspect of things, and maybe even those who might be leaving the US right now for political reasons, Hungary probably wouldn't necessarily be the most optimal choice for those who are leaving the US for political reasons at this moment in time. I'm not going to go into details here, but I think if you've listened to anything going on in the news, that it could be pretty clear. And to make it clear, I'm not in support or against what's happening there, who's in charge, or any of these things. It's a race that I definitely do not have a horse in. But I can say for me, actually, at one point, I did very seriously consider living there. There are certain things about living in Hungary that I think could be really interesting. But again, for me and the way that my work goes, and from a taxation perspective, it's not the best option. And I think there are other options in Europe for those who kind of work for themselves and or do freelance, that it might not be the best choice for some situations. And next on our list, Iceland, a country that is somewhat removed from the main part of Europe, but is a country that many people do enjoy. Again, it's one of these places that I can't say I have too much knowledge about, but it would be on my list of places that I'd be curious to visit. And after Iceland is Ireland. Definitely. If it were not for the cost of living there, I would very highly consider it, especially as an English speaker. It's going to be one of those places where it might be easier to transition to. I mean, for example, though, there could be some difficulties at the beginning if you're not accustomed to hearing certain Irish accents or any Irish accents, or the way that people speak there. The way that people communicate can be different if you're coming from North America. Maybe if you're coming from certain parts of Canada, there could be certain similarities that you could be familiar with. But that's a different topic for a different day. But Ireland, I think, is one of those places, especially, that you do have to be prepared for the weather and the cost of living. And even I have friends, for example, who went from Ireland to Portugal because even though they were earning a fair wage, it was still a bit tough to make their way into the purchasing market for a home. And so if you are on the younger side, it might not necessarily be the most ideal, but is it a place where a person can make a life? I would think most definitely that could be possible. But it is a very small island and there is a shortage of housing. And like other countries, this seems to be leading into certain tensions rising regarding this topic. Next on our list is good old Italy. I mean, what can I say? It's an amazing place. I mean, I can say for many people, it would be a wonderful place to live. I know I loved living there. And even though there were certain things that I found difficult and certain things that I found to be imperfect, it's a place that I can say could be towards the top of my list just based on quality of life, quality of food, and various other factors. I mean, even if you're talking about Italy, you have to also think that there are differences between different parts of the country. For me, the north is where I personally would be looking if I were seriously thinking that Italy would be the place that I'd be calling home. The south might be interesting, though, if I were retired and I didn't have to worry about making money and I were thinking about that I just wanted warm weather and living by the sea. But I think there are also other kind of modern comforts, we could call them, that come along with living life in the north. Again, I'm not recommending whether a person should live there or shouldn't live there, but it would definitely be towards the top of my list, if not at the very top. And the next country on our list is Kazakhstan. I really was trying not to make any reference to Borat here, but I mean, I really don't know anything about the country, and I know Borat has absolutely nothing to do with what it's actually like there. So even though I'd love to be able to discuss and say a little something about it, unfortunately, I don't know enough about this country to be able to have a proper opinion on it. So we'll go to Latvia. And Latvia is a place where I think some people could enjoy. And if they're looking for some of the things that have to do with what they might think about as quintessential kind of European life and the quality of life, that they could find it there. However, it is a country that can be quite cold. And from friends of mine that have lived there, they've said that it can get quite boring, especially in the winter. And from what I've been told, really the only thing that ends up being kind of fun to do, or that you can kind of do it all, is either drink or go to the mall, or go to the mall and then drink. There didn't seem to be that much that would be possible to do. Granted, I have not been to Latvia, but it is actually a part of the world that, again, I'm curious about and would like to experience for myself. Would I like to live there? I'm not sure if I would like to call it home in winter, but could probably be a very beautiful place when the weather is warm, especially along the sea. Lithuania, I would probably have very similar opinions as I would to Latvia, but again, this is a country maybe that I know a little bit less about, so I'm not going to go into this one. And Luxembourg is next on our list. And this is actually coming to a point from a question, I don't know if it was on last week's episode or another episode, but somebody had asked about Luxembourg recently on my YouTube channel. And I would say, if you are going there with a job already, it could be an interesting place to call home, but it can be quite expensive there. And if you are not coming there already with a job, I've heard from friends who tried to make their lives there that things can be like they are in other parts of Europe, like, for example, Italy, where there's this kind of closed loop that you have to figure out where you can kind of insert yourself into. To get a job, you might need residency. To get residency, you might need an apartment. But to get an apartment, you might need a job. So there could be some challenges that you might face to be able to figure out how you can actually make your life there. Is it impossible? No, but it's going to definitely be a much more expensive part of Europe, and it will be a part of Europe where you also can earn more money. So even though you're earning more, you're going to spend more, and so your spending power isn't necessarily going to be maybe so much better than it might be in other places, but quality of life there is going to be among the top in Europe, at least in my opinion. The next on our list is Malta. I have some Maltese friends, and they can definitely be a fun bunch. I find the language that they speak fascinating. This combination of kind of like Italian, Arabic, and I guess French also is mixed in there. This kind of crossroads that you can see all of these different groups of people that had control over the island represented in the way that people communicate. I mean, English as well is another language that is commonly used there, but it's really interesting to me, also the history of the island, and talking about it, though, practically speaking, about living your day-to-day life in another part of the world. If you are looking for a small location, under the sun, beautiful weather, then it could be the right place for you. But the common complaints that I've heard about it, that there tend to be a lot of tourists in a very small area, and you don't necessarily have a lot of space to stretch out. So even though I might like to spend some time there, it might not necessarily be the type of place that I personally would like to call home on a regular basis, just because some more kind of touristy destinations and places that are a bit more quote unquote fun in the sun tend to be places that I personally find more difficult to call home on a day-to-day basis. And the next country on our list is Moldova. Unfortunately, this is another country I can't say that I know so much about or have really any experience with. So we're going to have to go on to Monaco, and Monaco's actually going to be quite a short one because, I mean, Monaco's Monaco. It's, I mean, a beautiful place. Like, the quality of things that you can find there, and I mean the cars that you see there, and the experience of being there, I mean, it's almost like a fantasy for many of us in the world. But for some people who could maybe call it home on a daily basis, I mean, that's amazing that they can enjoy it. But I think living in this particular micronation in Europe might not necessarily be for me, but could be fun for an afternoon trip. And unfortunately, the next country on our list is another country that I can't say I have a lot of knowledge about, and that's Montenegro. So we will go on to the Netherlands. And this, like I was saying before, with Belgium, these are two places that I think could be really interesting for those looking at life in Europe. And of course, depending on what type of lifestyle you're looking for. I mean, if you're looking for maybe kind of the more quote unquote quintessential experience of what many people think Europe might be, you could potentially find it in the Netherlands. But again, we're talking about a much higher cost of living than many other places. And there are going to be certain other things that for certain people might not necessarily be the most ideal, especially if you are working for yourself or you're working for your clients in a freelance type of position. There could be some, though, if you're getting a kind of regular, stable job there with a contract, that it could be a very wonderful lifestyle. And it is a country that I actually at one point did think about seriously, but found that it might not necessarily, for me, be the best choice personally. I can understand bits and pieces of the language and can say a few phrases, but not necessarily enough for proper communication. Although from what I've heard from many people is that it is one of the countries that can be a little bit more English speaker friendly. Not that it will always be that way, especially when you maybe get to smaller towns. But I can say amongst the Dutch people who I've met around the world, I always hear them speaking like a fantastic, amazing, unbelievable level of English. But the Netherlands would be a country that I would have maybe a difficult time to think as a place that I might call home. I would have to have a very good reason to be able to think about moving there realistically. Next on our list is North Macedonia, and unfortunately this is another area that I can't say that I have a large knowledge base, so we'll go on to Norway. And I think kind of like what I was saying about Denmark as well, other than the kind of part that it's small. I mean, of course, Norway is much larger. There are going to be certain things that people I think are going to be looking for within a kind of European lifestyle, but you are going to have a very cold climate, and that's just the reality of it. That's, I think, a big sell for a vacation, but not necessarily a huge sell for day-to-day life. I have been hearing, though, people complaining from there about how things have changed in the last years, especially with new residents coming to the country and making their home there. Things supposedly have been changing, and it's not quite the same as it once was. However, I think for many people, it still could be an interesting place. But if you are not prepared for the cold winters and dark winters, then it might not be the best choice for you. Next on our list is Poland. And this is a country that I think has a lot of potential and could be quite underrated in some aspects. However, given how close they are to, I guess you could say, the hot spots of what's currently happening, I don't know if I would necessarily aim to move there at this moment in time. It's close enough that I would say I might personally have some concerns if I were to make my way there. I do think, though, that in some aspects, especially if you're looking at business or you're working in the tech sector, there are things that are worthwhile looking at there and considering seriously. But again, we are talking about another place that could get quite cold. And one thing that I've been hearing over the last years is that there have been a lot of Polish people who've been returning from Germany to move back to Poland. And there have even been Germans who have been moving from Germany to Poland. Whereas, I mean, we go back not too long ago that it was very much the other way around. And you were seeing Polish citizens looking to move to Germany and work in Germany and make a life for themselves in Germany. But now things seem to be looking very much the opposite way. But I mean, hey, like pierogi. I mean, that, I think, is actually a solid enough reason to move there alone. Just the food. I mean, it's like A-star from me. Next on our list is Portugal. I'm going to skip over this one because last week I devoted a whole episode, and actually a lot of the videos on this channel have been devoted to Portugal. So if you're curious as to what my thoughts are, you can check that up in the probably this corner of the video, or I'll try to put an end card at the end, or maybe even a link in the comment section below this episode on YouTube. I think it's a wonderful place, but unfortunately, I just don't think that it's the same like it used to be. And what I fell in love with Portugal seems to be fading away, especially in the big cities. Next on our list is Romania. And this is another part of the world like Poland that I think could be interesting. I think that there's the possibility that it might be underrated, but given its proximity to kind of current events, it might not necessarily be the first on my list. But I think if everything were kind of in a more normal situation, that it would probably be one of the places I would be most curious about, that I'm least familiar with, and probably out of the countries that I would say maybe could be worth considering, one of the ones that I would maybe at least go and spend a few months in before making a final decision. Because I mean, there are certain countries I can say without a doubt, like, that I just wouldn't consider at all. France being one of them, like I mentioned earlier in the episode. But Romania, to me, is a lot more interesting than even France. Next on our list is Russia. I'm not going to go into details about what's going on there. I'm sure if you've looked at the news in the last few years, you'll have an idea. Again, I'm not going to be saying that I'm in support of or that I'm against anything, but I think if we were talking about an ideal world and there was nothing happening and things were la-di-da, wonderful, everything's amazing, Russia would actually be one of those countries that I would be the most curious about spending time and living in, even more so than Romania. Probably it would be actually at the top of the list of, again, some of these places that I would be almost not familiar with at all, but would be wanting to spend time in. And actually, there was a brief moment where I very seriously looked into what it would take to move over there. And I almost did. I was very, very close to making it a reality, but in the end, I made other choices. And so at this point in time, I can say it's a country that I'm very curious about. But at this moment in time, it wouldn't be the place that I would rush to immediately, even though I would like to. Next on our list is San Marino. And this is another micronation that is found actually kind of within the borders of Italy. And I've heard some wonderful things about the beauty of this place and what it can be like there. And I would say for those who are retiring to Europe, San Marino could be worthwhile looking at. Actually, I did an episode with Marco Permunian of the Italian real estate podcast, I think, actually, or maybe it was the citizenship, probably the real estate podcast, where we spoke a little bit about San Marino. And I would highly recommend to go check out that episode because it gives a little bit more of an idea of kind of what it could take to make a life out there. I mean, even if you're actually looking to make a business in Europe, this could be a very interesting place to call home for the business, at least, because you have certain, depending on the type of business that you're doing, it could actually prove to be very advantageous to call that country home because of the way that their system works and some systems that they've set up for people building businesses there. The next three, though, I'm going to kind of lump together because, again, this is another part of Europe that I'm a little less familiar with, and that would be Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia. Again, places that I'm curious about, but that I haven't been to and that I can't say I know too much about. I can say, though, I have heard actually wonderful things about these places from people who are from these places, but they wouldn't be on my short list of places to move to immediately, but definitely I would like to spend some time there. And next on the list is Spain. This is definitely a country that I could say for me would be amongst the top countries that I might realistically consider. And there was a time that I actually very seriously consider it. And I traveled there I have family there, and I went to go visit them, and I looked at different places kind of in the vicinity of where they were within a couple hours or so to see if there was a place that seemed like it might be right for me. And at the time, it just didn't feel like the right fit for me. And even now, I can't say that it would really feel like the right fit. But I think there are many people who would really enjoy living there. And it's fun. There's something about Spain that I can't quite put my finger on that I really like. And for many people, it could be a wonderful place to call home, especially if we're talking about the southern coast, Andalusia. Oh my goodness. That is a really, really beautiful place. I mean, Gibraltar, actually, I'm realizing wasn't on this list. Technically, it's part of the UK, but that is maybe my favorite location, even though it's not technically part of Spain. It's a wonderful little slice of the crossroads of these two cultures and these two groups of people and these two languages coming together to make a unique little corner of Europe. So even though Gibraltar is not part of Spain, I'm keeping it within this section because I think it's a cool little place that has a little bit of Spanish flair with a little bit of the feeling of being in Britain. It's like tropical Britain. Not tropical, but very warm. Very, very warm. Next on our list is Sweden, and I would say pretty much refer to what I've been saying about Norway and Denmark. There are going to be certain things that are wonderful about these places, but can be really, really cold. And it wouldn't be necessarily the first place that I would rush to. But again, I would maybe want to spend some time there, but not necessarily live there. And next on our list is Switzerland. This is actually a country that my family very seriously considered moving to when I was younger, when I was a kid. And there are certain things that I think could be really wonderful about living life there. I mean, some of the organization and how things work, like I mentioned earlier, that what some of the people might be looking for in Germany who are looking to live abroad, they might be able to find those things in Switzerland. But in Switzerland, you have a very different kind of German that's spoken, but it's only spoken in one kind of portion of the country. The country is basically split into 4 languages, Swiss German, Swiss French, Italian, and Romansh. These are different languages with different cultures kind of associated with them, different peoples. But overall, this is Switzerland. So there's something that connects all of these people together regardless. And Switzerland is one of those places that I think is really interesting for people who are looking for a certain level of reliability from the place that they are living in. But the cost of living there, this is, again, going to be one of the highest places that we're going to be talking about, one of the most expensive places. I mean, when I had to go to Italy earlier this year, I had to fly actually through a connecting flight in Zurich. And I mean, the cost of things there was absurd. I was thinking, you know what? I'm going to be in the Zurich airport. Swiss chocolate is some of the best chocolate in the world. And I found this one little stand. It wasn't like the most top quality, this, that, whatever, but it was Swiss chocolate. And I think I paid for 3 pieces for 3 truffles, maybe something like 15, 16 euros. No, francs. So very close to the euro. And I mean, can I say it was worth it? Yeah, it was worth it. It was definitely worth it, but it was very expensive. And even getting food there was not cheap either. I think, though, for me, though, on a day-to-day basis, there are certain restrictive kind of aspects of what life can be like there, and maybe not as flexible as certain other places, that for me, even though it's not like, oh my gosh, like they're so just doing only things like this or doing things like that, there are certain aspects of life there that I think can really be nice if you are looking for that lifestyle. But I think for me, I just have become more accustomed to more Mediterranean cultures and lifestyle and kind of the way that things are done. Not that I wouldn't live in Switzerland, though. It's not a place that I'm rushing to live in. I'm not like saying, oh my gosh, I have to move there. That's actually very much not the case at all. If I were to even consider it, I would have to have a really good reason to go there. I wouldn't just say, oh, you know what? I think my next destination that is going to be my home is Switzerland. Like I said, I'd have to have a really good reason to even think about calling it home, even though it's definitely a place that I do very much like. Next on our list is Turkey. And oh my goodness, if we're talking about my love for food, music, and culture overall, Turkey would be very, very high on that list. There are certain things that I just really, really loved about the short amount of time that I've spent in that country. And I mean, the food, just to begin with, love the food. It is so good. I can't complain. I'm just a big fan of food from kind of like that part of kind of not quite Middle East, not quite Europe, and then all the way over to the Middle East, even Persian food, Lebanese, Syrian. I mean, Lebanese. Oh my gosh, wow. We're starting to talk about the region of this globe where I find a lot of my favorite foods. And so I don't know, though, if it would be a place that I would realistically consider living. Because I've been hearing over the last years with certain things with the economic status of the country and how it is for earning a living in that country that I think for me wouldn't necessarily be what I would look for in a place, that there are certain things that I might look for that would go in a little bit of a different direction, but it's not a place that I would rule out completely, but it's not a place that I would say that it's on my list of places that I would move to. It's on my places where I would like to spend more time, but as a non-resident, more as a tourist, and maybe even for extended periods of time. Next on our list is Ukraine. And like I've been saying throughout this episode, there are certain places that, based on current events, that I wouldn't be rushing to based on what's happening. Although, what I can say is that even though Russia and Ukraine are very different places with very different people, and that there are things that maybe are similar between them, they're still very different. But I did have a very high level of interest in exploring Ukraine in a very similar way that I had to exploring Russia. These are places that I haven't spent time and would like to be able to spend more time. But just at this moment in time, I don't feel as though these are places that I would prefer to explore. I think maybe at some point in my life I would like to. Just at this moment in time, I don't feel as though that it's the most appropriate choice to make for me personally. And the final country or group of countries on our list would be the United Kingdom. This grouping of nations together is a place that I think many people from North America might think of first, especially because of the language. And so for me, there was a point in time where I definitely really wanted to go and where it really would have been attractive to me. I can say, though, that time has kind of passed in a similar way to maybe how my interest changed with Germany. There was a point in time where both of these countries would have been very high on my list, but I think things have been kind of going in a direction that I'm not sure that I would necessarily want to call it home. But if I had an opportunity, if there were something that were drawing me there, then I would consider it. But of course, again, we have to talk about the weather. I mean, a lot of Europe, when we're talking about wintertime, can get cold and or rainy, or maybe just straight up rainy. Like in the case of the UK, things can get very gray and rainy and chilly. Personally, I actually like the rain and I really enjoy it. And that was one thing that got me thinking about moving there to begin with, because I spent a lot of my childhood both in California and the Pacific Northwest, but I really, really enjoyed the Pacific Northwest around Seattle and the gray, rainy skies there. It was always comforting to me just because it was a big part of my childhood. I know for many people, like, oh, gray, rainy skies, I can't stand it. But it was something that I actually always really enjoyed and reminded me of times, specific moments growing up, especially going out in the rain with my grandfather as a child. I mean, we had lots of fun going on little adventures, or he would get his coffee and he would get me a biscotti, as you call it in the States. And so there are those things for me that I really like. And so from that perspective, I don't think I would actually really mind it too much, just because I am one of those strange people who likes the rain and enjoys it. But like I said before, I've, over the years, gotten more accustomed to the Mediterranean lifestyle, Mediterranean cultures, and how things are done in these places. So I think for me at this point in my life also, it wouldn't be the type of place that I would rush to. Although I think for many people who are moving abroad for the first time from North America, even if things aren't the same as what they once were, and even if maybe safety and security could be a little bit more of a question than they could have been at a certain time, like for example, in places like London, like being able to wear a watch in the street, or at least like a luxury watch. I mean, I don't own luxury watch. It's just not my level of watch wearing. But I do think that it says something about a place when you're not necessarily able to walk in the streets freely in certain circumstances under like wearing certain things. I think for me, I would much prefer to be in a place where you have that ability. Again, I don't own any of these watches, but I think, again, it's a symptom of maybe other issues that could exist within a place that a person could see on a day-to-day basis. And even if they don't see it, and even if they're not exposed to it on a day-to-day basis, there could be that thought in the back of your mind. And that's not something that I'm personally looking for. Of course, I'm very much specifically talking about London here. And there are going to be other places in the UK that are much safer and that are much better options. However, I mean, you can go on YouTube and watch many videos about how things have changed in the UK over the last years, and how some of these places that once were the places that people flocked to are really becoming run down and just aren't what they once were. So I think there are certain things that are wonderful about it, especially for people who are going abroad for the first time. But I think there could be other options that could be more enjoyable for those who are looking to make a life abroad. But anyway, this has been a very long episode, so I'm just going to round out this episode here. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Thank you to those of you who helped to make these episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter possible. I'll see you all next time. Stay safe and healthy out there, and have a great weekend. Later.